Hello, I'm Hanbyul Joo, a professor at Seoul National University in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering. So earlier, we talked about the past and the current stage of AI. And now, let's talk about the future of AI. So before moving on, let me ask you this question, assuming there are people or students who are interested in working on this AI field. How to be a good AI researcher? Any idea?
Shouldn't the researcher build an AI good enough to be able what it's asked to do?
I guess upholding AI ethics is a really important quality for a good researcher.
A good researcher would be someone who works on idea that can truly make their work, truly work.
Sure.
Someone who can make AI that collaborates well with humans.
Right. So all these are really good answers. And I'm going to also share my answers at the end of this talk after we study all these things, okay?
Okay.
Great. So I believe you heard about the story like ChatGPT is a generative AI. Do you have any idea about what the generative AI means here compared to maybe other types of AI? Any idea?
Yeah, I would say that the more we communicate with it, the more it's learning by itself.
Learning by itself? Okay, that's a possible answer. You can actually feel that maybe a generative AI is generating something, right? So to study the generative AI, maybe let's take a look at some other typical types of AIs first. Typical types of AI is often called discriminative AI, such as classifying cat and dogs from the images. So let me just give you one simple example as shown here. A green is a dog sample, and orange is a cat sample. And what AI learns here is basically this kind of decision boundary. So basically, AI learns that this space belongs to the cat sample. What's interesting here is this kind of discriminative model can make some interesting right decision, but it cannot draw cat and dog images. So what's interesting here is somehow this AI knows the difference between cat and dog, but it cannot resample or synthesize some similar cat or dog images. Compared to that, the generative AI can even synthesize or generate a new unseen sample that is similar to the real data. But here, let's maybe think about what do we mean by the real data.
So does generative AI can actually create something new?
That's an excellent question. The answer is yes. It can generate something new which was unseen in our training set. But that is not from nothing, meaning generative AI can create something by finding a new composition or finding a new combination of existing pieces. But usually this generative AI is learned from many data, so it has many ingredients, many pieces. So we feel that the newly generated one, new combination, looks like a new version.
We learned the other day actually that AI could actually guess some new informations that are not in the database because it was taught the calculus. So.
Oh, you mean the math?
Yes.
If I directly jump to the answer, it actually found out some interesting or plausible combination of some data given all possible combinations. So finding out those plausible combinations is actually the key of generative AI. So let's see also in this toy example on languages. So I just typed two sentences, the first one and the second one. And you can easily recognize that the first one looks like a normal one, right? Hello, I am Hanbyul Joo. We are exploring the world of AI together. Compared to that, the second one looks like just random combination of alphabet. As a human, we can easily recognize which one is a valid real data and which one is invalid random noise. But in machine's perspective, for example, they look quite similar to each other. For example, the first one is a kind of combination of letter. So for machine's perspective, a letter, alphabet letter, is considered as a number. So the first sentence is just a combination of some numbers. Similarly, the second one is also a combination of some numbers. But humans tell that the first one is more plausible one, and second one is less plausible one. But for machines' perspective, this is really confusing. So if you ask machines to write down some valid sentence, machines are very struggling because it has no idea which combination is valid and which combination is invalid. And maybe let's take a look at this example here. For machines' perspective, this looks also valid because it's just also a combination of numbers at each location. Maybe let's take a look at this example. It looks like not a valid one, but not a completely invalid one, maybe in the middle between a valid image and invalid image, right? What about this one? This looks like a real image, right? In fact, this is generated by AIs. That basically means AI can now figure out what is the plausible combination of pixel value to make realistic images. So like this, well, what generative model does is finding out some plausible combination of numbers from real data. So in mathematical perspective, generative modeling basically is meaning understanding some distribution of the data sample. So understanding distribution of the data sample basically means for some sample, it knows that this is something you can see more frequently in our real data set. Something is less occurring in our data set, and something is never occurring in some data set. So knowing this distribution is basically telling which one occurs more frequently than others. So what's the advantage of knowing this distribution? Basically, you can sample from the data. You can synthesize the data out of this distribution because you know which combinations are more plausible than others.
So like the R, W, X, H, what does it?
Oh, that basically means all possible space of combinations.
Okay.
So W means the width of image. H means height of image. I just write down some letter because there can be some variation of width and height. 3 means at each location we have RGB value. So in the machine's perspective, any possible combination can be a potential candidate for the image. But of course, the space is huge. The box, for example, and only those blue part I just drew here can be a valid sample. So for the machine's perspective, figuring out this boundary is the main key in building this generative model, so that you can only valid sample from this blue region here. That's excellent question. Yeah. So we can apply the same generative AI technology for this kind of video here. Of course, in the case of video, we need to also think about the temporal coherency because the AI need to generate multiple frames, but they are not random combination of frames. They are temporally coherent. So I found this interesting example on the internet. As the text, it provides like epic baby fight with animal, punches, and others. And you can actually see this really interesting video, right?
Yeah, it looks really real, actually.
So this video is really interesting because I do believe there is no such video at all in our real life, right? We can never imagine a baby like this baby can fight with this animal. But what's interesting here is this generative AI actually can have some knowledge about the baby and the animal and the fight. So from this piece of knowledge, it can make a new combination to come up with this kind of interesting video. So we have talked about many interesting ideas of generative AI and those examples. And we talk about them in language domain, image domain, and video domain. And in fact, we can apply this generative AI technology for any other data types. So let me also show you some other interesting examples for other domain, especially the one from my lab. Here we go. So this is a generative model for humans' 3D shape. So as the input, the model takes some desired human posture and some text prompt as the input. And then, as the output, the model automatically produces or synthesizes some plausible 3D human shape shown in this video. If you provide some text prompt for your desired kind of descriptions, the model can produce the output which is aligned to our input. This is interesting because in this generative model, the model knows the plausible human shape in this 3D space, which is also a kind of 3D generative human modeling. Basically, we can apply the same idea for other types of things. So as an input, this model takes a single portrait image as input, like shown on the left. And as output, it can produce an animatable 3D human avatar model, as shown on the right. So animatable 3D avatar means you can basically change the facial expression, facial viewpoint, as if it's a 3D human avatar model. More interesting thing here is you can even change some facial attribute based on your control. For example, here we are changing the beard part of the humans, but that looks pretty realistic because this generative AI models know basically the plausible human's appearance and possible variations in their facial attribute. I can show you more other examples, like changing your hairstyle. You can imagine many interesting applications of this kind of technology, right? Or you can even consider hats, different style of hat by making many interesting variations. Again, the similar idea. Generative models try to learn some plausible pattern in our real data and try to make some new kind of sample out of this kind of knowledge. We have talked about some human shapes. So same idea can be applied for human motions. So in this example, these are the output of our generative motion models. So the input is some text description, a person walks with backpack, and you can see this kind of 3D motion output as the output of your model. Similarly here, the generative model knows what would be the plausible human motion space so that it can generate some unseen human motions from the learned space. Let me show you more other examples here. A person walks with suitcase, a person jumps with umbrella, and some combination with them. So like previous example, the generative model knows how to make plausible human motions and also plausible human object interactions here. This is another style of generative modeling where now we are given some 3D human scans as input. And now the model knows some knowledge of our clothing. If the model knows such knowledge, we can basically decouple some specific clothing or accessories from the input, and we can put them back into basically another human like this. Based on this kind of technology, we can make many interesting different costume or different clothing style for any human character. Our lab is also very actively working on video generation model. So this is one of such example. In a very typical video generation model, usually the single image input and some language descriptions are provided as the input. However, if you only provide some language description, it may not be sufficient to produce some desired output. For example, if we want this girl tries to touch the teddy bear on behind, it may not work by just providing the text prompt. But in our example, we try to also provide some target location of the object. For example, we provide the location of the teddy bear by clicking one button or providing some mask. Then our model can produce this kind of desired output. So in this example now, we have more challenging example. So we have 3 cups. They look exactly the same. So again, in this case, I provide different locations as additional input. And in the result, the output is producing actually following our instruction by touching the different cup at each location.
So, Professor, you said a bit earlier that AI is learning human behavior, but what is the difference between imitating and truly understanding?
That's an excellent question, and that's really a hard question indeed. So we believe that imitation is just copying and pasting some patterns, existing pattern. Because it just does copying and pasting, it is maybe struggling to create some new thing or trying to handle some variations. Compared to that, we believe understanding is somehow more serious. But the problem here is it is really hard to measure the level of understanding. So in my own thought, a way of measuring the level of understanding is to gauge whether the model is good at forecasting the future. If it has better understanding, we believe that it has better ability to predict the future. So by measuring whether the model can predict the future well, we can actually see whether the model can have better knowledge or better understanding on the current context or situation.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. So we have talked about the underlying concept of generative AI, and we also have talked about many interesting examples of generative AIs in many different domains. However, to make the generative AI more stronger, we really need to have large-scale data so that the model can learn the more meaningful thing from this real data set. We do have lots of data for languages and images and videos. However, for other domains, such as 3D or human behaviors, we only have some limited amount of data. So as an effort of our lab, we are also trying to collect or scale up this kind of data a lot so that we can teach the machines for better knowledge. So this is one such example where we try to collect 3D human motion data with very lightweighted setup. So here, lightweighted setup basically means camera or goggle where you can actually see the four sides and basically two smartwatches. By just wearing these very lightweighted devices, you can basically capture the full 3D of your human motions. So you can see some example on the right. On the left, you can actually see the video recording from this egocentric view, which is the view from the camera the person is wearing. And on the right, you can see the 3D reconstruction or 3D prediction generated by our method. So the interesting thing here is the video cannot see own body, right? However, from this limited measurement, the AI model can predict the current human's 3D motions. So if we can have this kind of output by wearing these devices, if we can collect such 3D data for really, really long time for any places, basically we can collect more and more 3D motion data. And I do believe this kind of additional 3D data should be very helpful for training a new generative model. And this is another example where the three people are wearing the same setup. And now we can actually collect this kind of 3D motions of these multiple people. As an orthogonal direction, our lab is also building this kind of multi-camera system where now we can actually measure the 3D human motion up to the finger level motion and also the 3D movement of all these objects. If we can measure this kind of data from our system, basically we can collect some nice, interesting, or detailed human-object interaction. So you can see very fine detailed human motion and also the movement of the object. These are all views from our 70 cameras. Basically, you can imagine we can capture all these details of the human's emotions and behaviors.
So what is the biggest challenge AI must overcome to behave like a real human?
I think the first one is about the data, as I mentioned. If we have sufficient amount of data, we do have some so-called recipe or procedure to train the model. However, the biggest limitation is actually the availability of the data because capturing this kind of 3D human motion itself is not a trivial problem. It's a pretty challenging problem. That's why we need this kind of spatial devices. The problem is, if we are just dependent on this kind of spatial devices, we can only capture a few data sets because only my lab or some other labs can capture such things. Ideally, we want to have some similar scale like videos or images. So that is something actually lots of researchers are working on nowadays.
About the equipment with the camera and the two smartwatches, I was curious about how are the smartwatches used actually? Is it like their location towards each other that's giving data to the position, or how does it
That's an excellent question, and that's something like the question I got asked by other researchers. It's a great question. So the smartwatches are providing some velocity and acceleration signal of your arms, basically. So if you actually remember the application, like you are just walking and it can actually compute the distance of your walk and so on and so forth. Similar to that, it provides some limited signal about your arm movement. The problem here is, given these sparse signals, we want to predict entire human body signal, including the legs, which was never measured by all these devices. So AI need to predict, basically, by finding some correlation of your arm movement and leg movement and your egocentric camera's movement all together? That's very excellent question. Thanks a lot. So maybe let's move on. So given all these interesting things, I believe some of you or many other students are very interested in working on this specific domain of AI. For them, I want to come back to my very original question I asked you at the very beginning of this talk, which is about how to be a strong or good AI researcher. I'm gonna share some of my messages and tips based on my experience. So first of all, you need to learn some fundamental concepts, such as some programming skills, some mathematics, some fundamental concepts in computer science, because these are required to turn your ideas into the real product. And maybe second, I recommend to be surrounded by strong collaborators or strong mentors. I think that is the most efficient way to learn something, and that is from others, right? And third, you really need to be curious about your future, because if you can imagine the future, you can get more motivations. Feel free to have very bold research questions about the future and try to answer those questions by your own product. And lastly, if you're really serious about being a researcher, I really suggest you to be different from other researchers, because there are tons of researchers in this domain, many other researchers. And it's very important as a researcher to have your own identity as a researcher. For that, you may need to think about your own strength. What's the main unique point from all others? Okay, it's quite a long journey. Do we have any question here?
In terms of the future of AI, if you ask the average person what is scary or what they're afraid of, maybe it would be not being able to distinguish reality from AI. But from a researcher's point of view, is there something that scares you at all about the future of AI?
I would say it's more exciting because as a researcher, we prefer to get into more new and unexplored direction. So as a researcher, I'm more excited about this new journey and new future. But I totally understand that for other people, it would be too scary because it looks too good to be true in some cases. Yeah?
Yeah, I was very curious about what made you passionate about AI. I was wondering how you got into AI, actually.
I was always dreaming about the future. So whenever I saw, for example, sci-fi movie, I was very surprised about all this idea. And at the same time, I really have a big motivation to make that happening in real life because I do have such kind of technological knowledge. So I think that's the major motivation. Whenever I see a new idea, whenever I consider the new direction, I really wanted to make it as a real product based on our knowledge. And I'm also happy that people see my result and enjoying my research output, and also scared by my research output. Yeah, I'm pretty enjoying my research journey. Yeah. So AI technology is literally changing our daily lives. To this end, I do believe AI is not just our tool, but a partner which can support or help our daily life and every task. To make better AI system, we need to think about several things. For example, we need to think about good research questions. We need to think about how to collect good data. And we need to think about the good directions in this technology. I think only the sky is the limit. AI can provide pretty much everything. And I really recommend you to think about what would be the next of AI and how to change your imagination into the real life. Thanks a lot.
Hello, my name is Jung-Sang Kim. I'm a professor of electrical and computer engineering and physics at Duke University. I'm also a co-founder of a quantum computing company called IonQ. Quantum computing is
Unicorn.
Sci-fi.
Things like a puzzle.
Think of it as superpower. Quantum computers can crack a crypto system. Our entire financial system will collapse.
It would change the rules of the entire game.
I think they're not that far away. Right, ready to dive in?
Yeah.
All right, let's go.